My parents think you're a burden, and honestly, I agree. Those were the 10 words that ended my marriage before I even had time to finish putting away the groceries. My husband, Logan, didn't say it with anger. He said it with a cold, bored sigh, like he was telling me the weather was slightly disappointing. He didn't know that at that very moment, I was holding a secret that would flip his entire world upside down. In this story, you're going to hear how I went from the burden wife to the woman who owned everything he ever touched. You'll see exactly how a quiet woman plans a comeback, so loud it shakes a family to its core. Stay tuned, because the look on his face at the end is something you'll want to hear twice. Before we get into the details of how I dismantled Logan's ego piece by piece, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. We deal in justice here, and if you've ever been undervalued by the people who were supposed to love you, this community is for you. Drop a comment below if you've ever had a burden moment of your own. Now, let's get into the story of how I stopped being a wife and started being a lesson. My name is Natalie. I'm 33 years old, and for the last 6 years, I've been the invisible glue holding the Miller family together. If you looked at our life from the outside, you'd see a successful husband in a tailored suit and a wife who stayed home to manage the household. What you wouldn't see is that I was the one who managed our investments, handled the taxes that Logan found too confusing, and spent my weekends deep cleaning his parents' massive house because they were too old to do it and too cheap to hire a maid. Logan's parents, Bill and Martha, were the kind of people who treated kindness like a weakness. To them, I was a girl from a modest background who got lucky by marrying their son. Every Sunday dinner was a trial. Martha would run a finger over a bookshelf in my own home and talk at a speck of dust. Bill would talk over me as if I were a ghost. And Logan would just sit there, sipping his wine, never once defending me. The shift happened about 4 months ago. Logan's firm had a bad quarter. He was stressed, snappy, and started spending more time at his parents' place than at home. I thought I was being a good wife by picking up the slack. I did his laundry, I prepped his meals, I even did the research for his big presentation so he could sleep in. Then came that Tuesday. I had just come home from the grocery store. I'd spent $200 of my own inheritance money I'd kept in a separate account from my grandmother, to buy the expensive steaks his parents liked for our upcoming dinner. I was lugging the heavy bags into the kitchen when I heard them in the living room. "She just doesn't contribute, Logan." Martha's voice drifted through the door. "You're carrying the whole weight. A man in your position needs a partner who opens doors, not someone who just hangs around the house like a heavy coat." I froze. I waited for Logan to say, "She does everything for me." I waited for him to mention that I was the reason his credit score was 800. Instead, I heard Logan sigh. "I know, Mom, it's exhausting. I feel like I'm dragging her across the finish line every single day." I walked into the room then. My heart was thudding against my ribs so hard I thought it would bruise. "Exhausting?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Logan, I did your entire quarterly report last night while you slept." He didn't even look guilty. He just looked at me with this pitying stare. "That's exactly the problem, Natalie. You do these little things and think they matter, but my parents think you're a burden. And honestly, I agree. You're just there. You don't bring anything to the table anymore." The room went ice cold. It wasn't just a crack in the marriage. It was a total collapse. He wasn't just saying he was unhappy. He was saying I had no value as a human being. I looked at Martha, who was smirking behind her tea, and Bill, who wouldn't even meet my eyes. "A burden," I whispered. "Don't be dramatic," Logan said, waving a hand. "We're just being honest. Maybe a break would be good. My parents think I should move back home for a bit to recenter myself, without the noise." I realized then that they had already decided my fate. They wanted the benefits of my labor without the burden of my presence. They thought I was a weak girl with nowhere to go. They forgot one very important thing. I wasn't just the girl who did the laundry. I was the girl who had been quietly managing the Miller family's entire financial ecosystem for 6 years, and I knew where every single body was buried. The next 3 days were a blur of silent rage. Logan actually packed a bag. He didn't even say goodbye properly. "I'll call you when I've had some space," he said, as if he were doing me a favor by leaving. I sat in our quiet house that night, staring at the walls. The burden comment looped in my head like a broken record. I felt small. I felt like a fool. I looked at the beautiful furniture I'd picked out, the garden I'd spent hundreds of hours planting, and the life I'd curated for a man who thought I was a heavy coat. But then, The sadness turned into something sharper, something jagged. I went to my home office, the small room Logan called my craft room, even though I used it to run our lives. I pulled out the files. See, Logan's father, Bill, had a small real estate holding company. Because I was so good with details, Bill had asked me to help him digitize his records 3 years ago. Since then, I'd been his unofficial bookkeeper because he didn't want to pay a professional. As I scrolled through the spreadsheets, I saw it. It was something I'd noticed a year ago but had ignored out of family loyalty. Bill had been cutting corners, big corners. He'd been misclassifying properties to avoid certain taxes, and he'd been using Logan's name as a cosigner on several creative loans that Logan was too lazy to actually read before signing. Logan thought I was a burden. No, I was the only thing standing between them and a total financial meltdown. I spent the next week living on coffee and spite. I didn't call Logan. I didn't text him. When Martha called me to ask where her blue floral blouse was, the one I'd taken to the dry cleaners, I told her I didn't know. "Well, find it, Natalie," she snapped. "Logan says you're being difficult. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "I'm not being difficult, Martha," I said, my voice steady. "I'm being a burden, and burdens don't do laundry." I hung up before she could respond. The tension in my chest was a living thing. I knew that if I was going to leave, I couldn't just walk away with a suitcase. If I did that, they'd spend the rest of their lives telling people I was the crazy ex-wife who couldn't hack it. No, if I was going to be a burden, I was going to be the kind that crushed everything it fell on. I started by visiting a friend from college, a woman named Andrea who specialized in forensic accounting. We met at a small diner 2 towns over. When I showed her the files I'd pulled, her eyes went wide. "Natalie," she whispered, "do they know you have this?" "They think I'm too stupid to understand what I'm looking at," I told her. "Well," Andrea said, sliding the laptop back to me, "if these documents find their way to the right people, Bill doesn't just lose his business. Logan loses his personal assets, too. They're all tied together in a giant, messy knot." I felt a shiver of fear. This was my life, too. Our house, our cars, our future. If I pulled the thread, I'd lose the house. I'd be starting from 0 at 33. I spent a long, sleepless night staring at the ceiling, wondering if I could really do it. Could I burn down my own house just to make sure they felt the heat? Then I remembered Logan's face when he said he agreed with his parents. I remembered him smirking while I carried the heavy groceries. The choice was made. The planning was the most alive I'd felt in years. I realized that the reason Logan thought I was a burden was because I had made his life too easy. He didn't know the cost of a gallon of milk, the date the mortgage was due, or how to handle a tenant dispute. He was a child playing at being a man, supported by a father who was playing at being a mogul. I didn't file for divorce immediately. That would have alerted them. Instead, I did something much more surgical. First, I cleaned up the books for Bill, but I didn't fix the errors. I simply organized them in a way that made the errors impossible to miss for anyone with a basic understanding of tax law. I created a digital trail that linked every single one of Bill's bad decisions directly to Logan's digital signature. Next, I withdrew my inheritance from our joint accounts. Logan hadn't even noticed I'd put it there to help with the down payment on our home. I moved every cent of my grandmother's money into a private trust. Then came the property. There was a small commercial building downtown that Bill owned. He'd been trying to sell it for years, but it was a money pit. To save on taxes, he deeded 49% of it to Logan as a gift. I knew the building had a massive structural issue that Bill had been hiding from inspectors. I also knew that the city was planning a major redevelopment project on that exact block. I made a few anonymous calls to the city's building department. I didn't report the issue. I just suggested that a routine inspection of the older buildings on that block would be a good idea before the redevelopment started. While the city started their wheels turning, I began the great unburdening. I stopped paying the bills. I didn't cancel the services, I just stopped the autopay. I knew Logan wouldn't notice until the lights went out. I stopped the landscaping service. I stopped the pool guy. I even stopped the subscription to the expensive wine club that Logan's father used to brag about. About 2 weeks into this, Logan finally called. "Natalie, why is the internet off?" he barked. "I'm trying to work from my parents' place and I can't log into the home server." "Oh, I'm sorry, Logan," I said, my voice sweet. "I thought since I was such a burden, I should stop managing the household finances. To give you that space you wanted. I figured a big, successful man like you would have it handled." There was a long silence. "Just fix it," he snapped. "I can't," I said. "I've already packed up the craft room. I'm staying at a hotel for a few days to clear my head. You'll have to call the provider yourself. Oh, and your father called. Something about an inspector at the downtown building." He sounded stressed. I hung up before he could yell. The rush of adrenaline was incredible. It was like watching a row of dominoes lean forward. They hadn't fallen yet, but the air was moving. The final piece of the puzzle was Susan. Susan was a woman who had worked for Bill for 20 years and had been passed over for promotion 3 times in favor of younger, charismatic men. I met Susan for coffee. I didn't tell her much. I just handed her a folder of her own accomplishments compared to the men who had been promoted over her, along with a few anonymized salary sheets I'd found in Bill's files. "You deserve a seat at the table, Susan," I told her. "And when the table breaks, you should be the one holding the hammer." She looked at the papers, then at me. She knew exactly what I was doing. "Why are you helping me, Natalie?" "Because," I said, "I'm tired of being the only one carrying the weight." The collapse happened on a Friday. The Millers always had a big family achievement dinner on Fridays at the local country club. They liked to sit in the center of the room so everyone could see them. I showed up. I wasn't invited, but I had the keys to the car and a dress that made me feel like a diamond. I walked into the dining room just as their appetizers were being served. Logan was there, looking frazzled. Martha looked like she'd been sucking on a lemon. Bill was staring at his phone, his face gray. "Natalie!" Logan stood up, his chair scraping loudly. "What are you doing here? I told you we'd talk next week." "I couldn't wait," I said, pulling up a chair and sitting down. I didn't wait for an invite. "I heard the news about the downtown building, the structural failure, the $200,000 fine for the hidden violations. It's a shame, Bill, especially since Logan's name is on the deed as the primary responsible party." Bill's fork hit the plate with a clang. "How do you know about that?" "I'm the burden, remember?" I smiled at Martha. "Burdens hear everything because no one thinks we're smart enough to understand. But here's the thing, Bill. I didn't just hear, I documented." I pulled a single legal envelope from my purse and slid it across the table. It wasn't a divorce filing. Not yet. It was a list. "This is a list of every single creative tax filing you've made in the last 5 years," I said calmly. "It's also a list of every bill that hasn't been paid in the last month. The mortgage on this house, it's 30 days past due. The country club membership, it declined this morning." The table went dead silent. A few people at the next table turned to look. "You bitch," Logan whispered, his face turning a deep, ugly red. "You're ruining us over a comment." "Not over a comment, Logan," I said, leaning in. "Over the truth. You said I was a burden. A burden is something you carry, but I wasn't being carried. I was the floor you were standing on, and I just decided to move." "We'll sue you," Martha hissed, her voice trembling. "We'll tell everyone you're a thief." "With what money, Martha?" I asked. "Bill's accounts are being frozen as of 4:00 p.m. today for an emergency audit. Susan, remember her? Well, she's currently at the labor board with a very detailed map of how Bill has been underpaying his female staff for a decade. And since Logan is a partner on those accounts, he's just as liable." I stood up. I felt light. I felt like I could fly. "I've already moved my things out of the house," I told Logan. "Since you wanted space, you have it. The whole house is yours, along with the debt, the lawsuits, and the angry phone calls from the city. I've already filed for a legal separation, and because of the way you tied your assets to your father's failing business, you don't have enough left to even pay a lawyer to fight me for the inheritance money you thought was ours." I leaned down and whispered in Logan's ear. "By the way, I took the steaks back to the store for a refund. I figured since I was a burden, I shouldn't be buying you dinner." I walked out of that country club without looking back. The fallout was spectacular, but not in the way you'd see on the news. It was a slow, agonizing grind for them. Bill had to sell almost everything to settle the fines and avoid jail time. Logan's fast-track career at his firm ended when the news of his father's business practices hit the local papers. He ended up working a mid-level job in a different city, living in a one-bedroom apartment that Martha constantly complained was too small for her to visit. They lost the house. They lost the cars. They lost the status that was the only thing holding their family together. As for me, I didn't get a huge settlement. There wasn't much left to take. But I had my inheritance, and more importantly, I had my life back. I moved to a city by the coast. I started a small consulting firm helping women-owned businesses organize their finances. I'm good at it. I'm very, very good at it. The most surprising part, A year after the dinner, I received a letter from Susan. She had successfully sued Bill and used the settlement to start her own firm. She offered me a partnership. I'm no longer a heavy coat. I'm the one building the house now. And the best part, I don't carry anyone who doesn't know how to walk on their own 2 feet. Looking back, Logan was right about one thing. I was a burden, but only to myself. I was carrying the weight of people who didn't deserve my strength. The moment I let go, they fell, and I finally started to rise. Justice isn't always about a courtroom or a big check. Sometimes, justice is simply stepping out of the way and letting people experience the consequences of their own choices. If someone tells you you're a burden, believe them, and then show them exactly how heavy life gets when you're no longer there to carry it. If you enjoyed this story of a burden who broke the scales, don't forget to subscribe for more tales of justice and revenge. It's stories like these that remind us never to underestimate the person who handles the details. What would you have done in Natalie's shoes? Would you have stayed and fought, or would you have walked away and let it all burn? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and remember, your value is defined by you, not the people who are too lazy to appreciate it. See you in the next one.